She ripped my American flag out of the ground, in front of my son, a U.S. Marshal. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just smiled. Because she had no idea what was coming next, she screamed it like a lunatic cult leader. You don't get to just leave the HOA. And for a second, I genuinely wondered if she believed it. After living in the same Texas neighborhood for over 20 years, raising my family, paying my dues, never causing trouble, I figured I'd earned some peace. But the moment Karen got elected president of the HOA, the whole neighborhood changed. She turned it into her personal playground, like some petty tyrant in a pastel sweater, issuing fines over garden gnomes, threatening elderly neighbors for unauthorized porch furniture, and acting like every blade of grass needed her written permission to grow. But here's what Karen didn't know. I'd been planning my exit for years. I quietly bought the lot right next to the HOA boundary, just outside their legal control. No bylaws, no dues, no Karen. I built my new house with my own 2 hands, poured the foundation with pride, and when I moved in, I felt like I'd finally reclaimed a piece of my own life. I thought I was free, but freedom, it turns out, makes some people furious. Just 3 days after I unpacked, Karen marched right up my driveway, arms folded like a bouncer at a nightclub, and shoved a thick packet into my chest. You're still under HOA jurisdiction, she snapped. I calmly pointed to the county zoning map taped to my door and said, No, ma'am, I'm not. This property is outside your reach. Legally. You can verify it yourself. She glared like I'd insulted her bloodline. We'll see about that, she hissed, stomping off. I figured that was the end of it, until the next morning when I walked outside to find my mailbox ripped out of the ground and tossed in my yard like garbage. No note, no warning, just destruction. The camera I'd installed above my porch caught her red-handed. I reported it. Nothing happened. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Karen launched a full-scale campaign against me. I got threatening letters demanding back payments for HOA dues I didn't owe. She tried to report me to the city for unauthorized modifications to my own property. She even claimed I was operating an unregistered business because I had a shed with tools in the backyard. Then came the insult that turned my stomach. I'd just finished raising the American flag on the pole in my front yard, a gift from my son, a Marine who'd just returned from deployment. And Karen filed a complaint saying it was a visual nuisance and a potential safety hazard. That flag meant something to me. It meant everything to my son. That was the last straw. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I got methodical. I hired a lawyer. I printed every map, every land deed, every recorded HOA boundary. I installed more cameras. I filed formal complaints with the sheriff's office and county clerk. I built a wall of facts so solid even Karen's twisted logic couldn't climb it. I even offered her a sit-down meeting with my lawyer present. She declined, said, I was trying to intimidate her with male aggression. No, ma'am, I was trying to defend my property. A week later, she trespassed again, this time marching into my yard, yelling that my hedges were too tall and violated aesthetic uniformity. She had no jurisdiction, no legal right to set foot there, but she did it anyway. I filmed the whole thing. Later that same day, I was sitting on my porch when I saw her pull out her phone and call 911. I heard her lie through her teeth. Yes, there's a strange man on the property, refusing to comply with HOA orders. I feel unsafe. That's when things took a turn she never saw coming. Because the officer who responded wasn't just any cop. It was my son. Freshly promoted, in uniform. Full badge. Calm, confident, and no nonsense. Karen didn't recognize him until he walked right up and said, Ma'am, I need to ask you a few questions. You reported a trespasser? She pointed at me with the rage of someone absolutely certain of their power. That's him. He refuses to acknowledge HOA jurisdiction. My son looked at me, then back at her and said, Ma'am, this man owns the property outright. He's not under your HOA. You're trespassing, and you filed a false report. Her face drained of color. Wait, what? No, I'm on the HOA board. He has to obey. And that's when my son pulled out his badge and calmly said, And I'm a federal officer. You're under arrest for criminal trespass and misuse of emergency services. Karen shrieked like she'd seen the gates of hell. She tried to resist, screamed about her rights, threatened to sue, claimed we were harassing her. But my son handled it like a pro. She was cuffed, escorted off my property, and placed in the back of the cruiser while neighbors gathered, silent and wide-eyed. Some even clapped. The HOA tried to sweep it under the rug, but the footage went viral. Local news picked it up. Karen's meltdown, her arrest, her pathetic shrieks about losing control. It was all on tape. The board tried to defend her until I released copies of their emails, showing they'd backed every illegal move. They were forced to apologize publicly. Karen was removed from the board. I sued the HOA and won a settlement big enough to fund a second property out in the hill country. And I still fly that same flag, lit at night, waving high above my yard. But here's the part no one saw coming. A week after Karen's arrest, I received a certified letter. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a court summons. This time, I was being sued. Not by the HOA, not by Karen. By a shadowy neighborhood enforcement group, LLC, claiming they had acquired extended community jurisdiction through a private deed Karen secretly filed before she was arrested. My lawyer called it a scam, but the seal on the document looked real. Too real. And the listed address, for the plaintiff, my old HOA's office, burned down in a mysterious fire just 2 nights earlier. The next morning my mailbox was gone. Not broken, not knocked over. Gone, ripped clean out of the concrete like someone had taken a crowbar to it in the dead of night and dragged it off like a trophy. And I knew exactly who did it. Karen wasn't finished with her little tantrum just because I stood up to her. No, now it was war, and she was just getting warmed up. The first few shots were petty. A stack of HOA violation letters shoved into my storm door, each one more ridiculous than the last. Unmowed grass? I'd trimmed it that morning. Non-regulation exterior paint? The house was brand new, built outside her HOA's jurisdiction and painted according to city code. But she didn't care. I was a threat to her authority, and she needed to make an example. She reported my home to the county for unauthorized construction, even though I had every permit, every inspection passed, and a certificate of occupancy hanging on my wall. Then she tried to have my pickup towed from the curb in front of my own home, claiming improper street parking, even though it was a public road maintained by the city, not the HOA. The tow company didn't touch it once I showed them the legal land plat, but the message was clear. Karen would keep coming, complaint after complaint, hoping to break me down or force me out. And then she went after something she had no business touching, my son's flag. Just back from his second tour overseas, my boy had gifted me a flagpole, one he'd had custom made with the Marine Corps insignia etched in the base. We set it in concrete together, raised the American flag at sunset, and I watched him salute it with pride in his eyes. That flagpole wasn't just metal and cloth. It was family, sacrifice, freedom. 2 days later, I get a letter from Karen claiming it was a visual disruption and violated neighborhood uniformity standards. She tried to fine me $500 for flying the flag. That's when something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about her power trip anymore. This was personal, an attack on my home, my family, my dignity. But I didn't scream. I didn't knock on her door or blast her on Facebook like she wanted. I got smart. I gathered every letter, every recording, every time-stamped video from my cameras. I contacted the post office about the mailbox. They confirmed it had been removed without authorization. I filed a police report. I spoke to the city zoning department and got it in writing. My home, my property, and that flagpole were 100% in compliance. Then I hired a land use attorney. We submitted a cease and desist letter directly to the HOA and to Karen personally. She responded with more threats, this time through a private law firm she claimed represented the HOA, though they couldn't produce a single signed contract tying me to them. And that's when I found something interesting, buried in old public records from years ago when the HOA was first formed, was a map An official county map, clearly marking the boundaries. And my new property? Not even close to being included. In fact, the original HOA filing specifically excluded lots outside Phase 3. Karen had no legal ground to stand on. But instead of backing off, she escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find a citation posted on my front door, not from the city, but a private code enforcement notice taped up by Karen herself. Fake seal, no official number, just a typed-up paper claiming I had 72 hours to remove the illegal structure in front yard, meaning the flagpole. My blood boiled, but I stayed calm. I reported it to the sheriff. He laughed and shook his head, said this wasn't the first complaint about Karen, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But then things got truly sinister. My trash cans were overturned every morning. My motion lights got mysteriously disabled. Someone spray-painted "trash neighbor" on the back of my fence, the side facing the HOA homes. Karen's doing? Maybe. Maybe not. But the pattern was obvious, and the final straw came when my son, still in uniform, walked out one morning and found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. "Your kind isn't welcome here. Go back to where you came from." That was it. I took every shred of evidence, photos, video, reports, the note, and went to the county commissioner. I laid it all out calmly and thoroughly. He was horrified, promised to open a formal investigation into the HOA and Karen's actions. And that's when things flipped. I got a call from the HOA board's vice president, an older gentleman, who'd been quiet this whole time. He asked to meet privately. When we sat down at a local diner, he confessed, "Karen's been forging votes. She's issuing fines we never approved. She's pocketing money. But no one's dared stand up to her, until you." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside, internal emails, bank statements, a ledger, proof that Karen had embezzled over $60,000 from HOA dues for consulting fees, personal landscaping, even a spa membership. I turned it all over to the DA. Charges were filed. Karen was arrested 2 weeks later. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, harassment, trespassing. She pled not guilty. The news picked it up. Neighbors turned on her overnight. But here's the twist. As the HOA scrambled to clean up her mess, they discovered a second account, a secret fund. And tucked inside its transaction history was a single payment, made just days before my flagpole complaint, to a private investigator. The memo line read, "Background on my name. Dig up dirt." The HOA didn't authorize it. Karen paid, for it herself. But the investigator, turns out he was dirty too. And one of the files he'd collected on me had been passed to someone outside the neighborhood, someone connected to a group called Enclave Property Defense, LLC. I'd never heard of them, but the file showed they'd bought options on property near mine, including a strip of land bordering my fence. And last night, I found a sign staked in the ground I didn't recognize. Private access road under review. Enclave Holdings. Whatever this is, Karen started it, but I have a feeling someone much bigger is about to finish it. I didn't fight back with fists. I fought back with facts, cameras, and the law, and I fought like a man who's been quiet too long. The first thing I did was lock down every inch of my property with 360-degree surveillance, motion sensors, floodlights, and cameras that uploaded everything straight to the cloud. If a squirrel so much as twitched on my driveway, I'd have it on film. Then I filed a harassment report with the county sheriff's department, and I didn't just tell them what had happened. I showed them. I brought plat maps that proved my land was outside the HOA, county zoning documents, timestamps from the surveillance footage, and copies of every bogus letter Karen had dropped off or mailed, each one building a case for harassment, impersonation of an official, and trespassing. My lawyer drafted a cease and desist so airtight you could build a submarine out of it, and we served it to the HOA board. Certified mail, return receipt requested. But before the legal bullets started flying, I gave Karen one last chance, face to face. I waited until she strutted by on one of her phony compliance walks, clipboard in hand like she was the queen of suburbia. I stepped out on the porch, calm as ever, and said, "Karen, this property is not under your control. You set one more foot on it, and the next time we talk we'll be in front of a judge." She narrowed her eyes, lips curling into that condescending little smirk I'd seen 100 times before, and snapped, "Good luck, old man. I've got the board, you've got nothing." And that's where she miscalculated, because I didn't have nothing. I had my son. That weekend he came to visit. Tall, squared shoulders, calm eyes, Marine-turned-federal law enforcement. When he stepped out of the truck in uniform, badge clipped to his belt, Karen froze like she'd just seen her HOA kingdom crumble. He wasn't just a cop. He was a deputy, U.S. Marshal. And when I explained what had been going on, he didn't flinch. He took notes, recorded a statement, documented the harassment, and told me, "Dad, we're going to make this right, but we're going to do it by the book." That's when the real trap began to tighten. We installed a hidden trail cam facing the back fence, where someone had been throwing trash bags filled with dog waste and old chicken bones onto my property in the dead of night. We rigged the mailbox with a GPS tracker and motion sensor, in case it went missing again. And sure enough, within 72 hours, the same black SUV that Karen always drove circled past the house 3 times after midnight. On the 4th pass, she pulled over, headlights off. She stepped out with gloves on, something in her hand, and approached the mailbox. The second she touched it, the camera caught her. Motion lights snapped on, and she ran. But what she didn't know was that my son was watching from across the street, inside an unmarked sedan. He followed her home, didn't pull her over, didn't confront her, just documented everything. She had just committed federal mail tampering on camera, and the footage went straight to his department's legal office. The next morning, Karen tried to play it cool, walked her little poodle down the street like she hadn't been caught committing a felony the night before. But something had changed. She looked nervous, eyes darting, clipboard gone. That evening, my son filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office and forwarded the federal footage to the U.S. attorney. Now, it wasn't just a property dispute. It was a federal investigation. That same week, my attorney called. Turns out the HOA board had quietly scheduled an emergency meeting without notifying any residents, completely illegal under their own bylaws. We subpoenaed the meeting notes, and guess what? Karen had proposed using HOA funds to hire a security consultant to monitor non-compliant homes, aka mine. That consultant? The same PI she'd hired to dig into my past, the one tied to that shady development company, Enclave Holdings. It all started coming together like rotten puzzle pieces. Karen wasn't just harassing me out of spite. She was trying to force me off my land so she and her partners could scoop it up cheap and flip it. But now, with the feds circling and the county breathing down her neck, she was slipping. The final straw came one night when I got a knock at the door. It was her. No clipboard, no poodle, just standing there, shaking. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stood firm in the doorway. "Talk to my attorney," I said. But then she blurted something that chilled me. "They're coming for me." I didn't know who they really were. I thought it was just business. I asked, "Who?" Her eyes darted behind her, voice barely above a whisper. "Enclave. They don't just buy land. They take it, and they don't care how." And before I could ask another word, she turned and left. I haven't seen her since. The next morning, a different sign showed up on the edge of my property, metal, bolted into the ground. It wasn't from the city. It wasn't from the county. It simply said, "Development approved, access pending. Phase 1 begins July 1st. But here's the kicker. There's no permit on file. Not one. My son checked state records, and the address listed? It doesn't exist. It's a shell, just like the LLC. So now we're staring down something deeper than HOA tyranny. This is organized, hidden, and dangerous. And I've got cameras, lawyers, and a federal badge on my side. But something tells me we're just scratching the surface. Sunday morning started like any other. I was out front trimming the hedges, minding my own business, when I heard the rapid clicking heels of doom storming up the sidewalk. Karen. Again. She was already yelling before I turned around. Something about illegal modifications to the landscaping, as if I'd committed a felony by planting hydrangeas. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just gave her a calm nod and turned back to my hedge, which infuriated her even more. That's when she pulled out her phone and, in full performance mode, dialed 911 right there on the sidewalk, loudly declaring, "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious man trespassing and refusing to comply with HOA directives." I just stood there, quietly wiping my shears, knowing exactly what was about to happen. A patrol unit rolled up within minutes, lights flashing, and Karen, arms crossed like she'd just conquered Normandy, started waving them down like she was some sort of hero. And then, the car door opened, and out stepped my son, in uniform, calm, collected, the very picture of the law. Karen froze mid-rant as he approached. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "did you make this call?" Karen blinked, confused but still smug. "Yes, officer, that's the man. He's violating community codes. He's not complying with our HOA standards, and he's aggressive." My son looked at me, then back to her. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this man is standing on private property, his property, which is outside the jurisdiction of your HOA. And by making a knowingly false report, you've just committed a violation under Section 37.08 of the Texas Penal Code, false report to a peace officer." That's when her face started to crumble. "Wait, what? No, I'm on the board, But my son didn't let her finish. He reached into his vest, pulled out his badge, U.S. Marshal, and said, "Ma'am, I'm also a federal officer. You're under arrest." The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might pass out. Her arms flailed, voice breaking into high-pitched stutters. "You can't! I didn't mean... This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know." She collapsed to her knees on the sidewalk, clutching her little HOA binder like it could save her, and began sobbing. But it was over. He cuffed her with zero drama, read her rights as she babbled excuses about how she was just trying to maintain community standards, and placed her gently but firmly in the back of the patrol unit. A few neighbors peeked out of their blinds. A couple came outside. Phones started recording. The woman who had bullied half the neighborhood, fined them for flower colors and driveway cracks, who called herself the last line of defense for property values, was now wailing in the backseat of a cop car. And the man she tried to ruin? Silent, calm, standing tall beside his son, the one thing she couldn't control, intimidate, or outrank. That night, the video hit local Facebook groups like wildfire, 10,000 views by morning. The caption read, "HOA president calls. Cops arrest her instead." Emails flooded the HOA board demanding her removal. Her so-called allies ghosted her. 2 board members resigned within a week. And the lawyer representing the HOA? He quietly settled the civil harassment case my attorney filed days later, for a very generous sum. But the best part? That wasn't the end. Because while Karen was being processed downtown, my son leaned over and said something that would crack open the next level of this whole mess. "Dad," he whispered as we watched the last of the patrol units roll off. "She wasn't just calling 911, she was forwarding intel." I blinked. "Intel?" He nodded. "Her phone was already flagged by a task force. She's tied to at least 2 shell property companies under investigation for fraud and coercion. And now we've got probable cause." That's when I realized Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant with a clipboard. She was part of something bigger, something darker. This whole HOA fiasco, it might have just been the cover, and we were about to blow it wide open. Karen thought the worst was over after she was cuffed and driven away, but she had no idea that her real problems were just beginning. Within days, formal charges hit her desk: misuse of emergency services, criminal trespassing, and interference with private property. My attorney immediately followed up with a civil harassment suit, attaching a file thicker than a phone book. But what really lit the fire under this whole mess was the HOA's reaction. Instead of owning it, they scrambled, panicked, and tried to sweep it under the rug. The board released a flimsy statement claiming Karen acted independently, as if she was some rogue agent who'd gone off the rails. Problem is, I had receipts, emails dated and time-stamped, with subject lines like enforcing HOA, policy on new build, and support for Karen's intervention. Every single one showed the board backing her behavior, even encouraging her to hold the line. And then came the body cam footage, my son's video of the entire confrontation, arrest, and her breakdown on the sidewalk. I gave it to my lawyer, who gave it to the local paper, and within 24 hours it was online, viral, 500,000 views in 3 days. Local news picked it up. National blogs ran the headline, HOA president calls cops on homeowner, gets arrested by his son instead. The entire town was talking. People I hadn't seen in years called to say they saw me on TV, standing in front of my house like Clint Eastwood with a flagpole. Members of the HOA turned on her almost overnight. A few tried to defend her at first, but it didn't last. A public petition circulated, demanding her removal and full board transparency. Then the county DA stepped in. Turns out once that video hit the news cycle, they couldn't ignore it. Investigations into the HOA's conduct began piling up. The county sent auditors. Karen's name popped up in other complaints from previous neighborhoods. And while all this was unraveling, I stayed calm, focused, legal. My attorney reached out with a settlement offer, and guess what? They took it. $65,000, tax-free, plus a written public apology posted on the HOA's website, newsletter, and on a signboard placed right at the entrance of the neighborhood for a full 60 days. And that notice? It spelled it out in bold black print. The property located at 144 Oak Hollow Lane is not and never was under the jurisdiction of this HOA. All prior actions against the homeowner were unauthorized and unlawful. That sign stayed up like a trophy. People took pictures. Some honked as they drove by, even better. The county ordered them to pay for a new mailbox and refund my property taxes for the months Karen had falsely reported me as part of the HOA. And Karen? She was forced to resign in disgrace, mid-meeting, as angry homeowners booed her out of the room. Her face was red, her hair a mess, her voice shaking as she stumbled through a half apology before storming out the back door. The very next day, a moving truck showed up at her house. 6 months later, she was gone. Couldn't take the shame. Rumor has it she tried to join another HOA 3 towns over, but word spread fast. Nobody wanted her. She became infamous. A warning, not a leader. And me? I still live in that house. Same flagpole standing tall in the front yard, American flag rippling strong in the wind. Mailbox? Cemented in a block of concrete now. Reinforced steel post, straight as a rifle barrel. Neighbors wave, kids play, peace restored. But I never forget. Because this wasn't just about one Karen with a clipboard. It was about power. About what happens when good men get pushed too far, when dignity is trampled by people who think rules don't apply to them. And it was about what happens when the quiet ones stand up, not with fists or fury, but with facts, law, and a badge. And just when I thought the storm had passed, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a printed email thread between Karen and someone from the State Housing Authority. Someone higher up, someone still pulling strings. Looks like the HOA wasn't just a petty nuisance. It might have been part of something bigger, nastier, more organized. And if that's true, then Karen was just the beginning. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need to scream. It just stands tall, like an old oak, unshaken, unbent, and absolutely undeniable. If you've ever been pushed around by an HOA or a power-hungry Karen, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true stories of justice served, and drop a comment if you've got one of your own. You might be next.